My name is Earl Willis Jr. I'm from the Warren County Public Library. Today is March the 21st, 2017, and we're in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And today we're talking to Jim Allen. Mr. Allen, when and where were you born?
I was born in Owensboro, Kentucky in 1945.
1945, okay. And what, did you have any other siblings or your parents that was in the service?
My father was. My father was in the Army in the Army Air Corps actually during World War II.
Okay. Do you think that had maybe a bearing on your military service, or?
My father didn't say much about it. He wasn't in long. Served minimum time and was out. I don't think it had a lot of issues on my military. I didn't have, actually, to be honest, when I joined the Army, I didn't expect to be a career soldier, but the more I was in, the more I appreciated it and liked what I was doing.
Okay. And what branch did you serve?
I was in the Army,
Okay.
the Army Reserve mainly.
Okay. Was there a particular reason why you picked the Army over the other branches?
No, not particularly. When I joined the reserves, it was the most accessible unit at the time.
Okay. We've talked about this before, so maybe you can explain to the people watching this. Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I enlisted. I joined the Army Reserve on my own. I was going to serve my military time as a reservist. I think there was a 6-year obligation, where you drill 2 days a month, and then you have an extended period, usually during the summertime, an annual training period. I was in college. I was married, had an infant son, and I thought that was my best options at the time.
Do you remember leaving to, I guess, either flying the airplane or on the bus, leaving to go to basic training? Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. My wife drove me to Fort Knox.
Okay, so she was your transportation.
Yeah, I lived in Litchfield, Kentucky, which is just north of here, and it's probably 40 miles to Fort Knox. So on my report date, she just drove me up there and got out, kissed her goodbye, and walked in the barracks.
Okay. Do you remember being sworn in?
Yes, yeah, we did. There was a group swearing in. There was a whole company of new trainees. We went in. I actually don't remember the building, but we all raised our hand and were sworn in.
Yeah. Do you remember any of your instructors from basic training?
Oh yeah. There was a Sergeant Gonzalez and a Sergeant Simpson. You never forget your drill sergeants.
What kind of impression did that make on you?
Oh, they were. Of course, I knew what I kind of knew what I was getting into when I did it, and it was all my own choosing. So I had a good attitude about everything. I had no problems. Luckily, because of the timing situation that went in, most of the soldiers in my basic training unit were in fact National Guard or Army Reserve soldiers. So we all fairly well knew what our future held for us, and it made for a nice environment, for lack of a better term, because everybody had a positive attitude. Nobody went AWOL. Nobody caused any trouble. We were all just good soldiers, and it made for a pretty less stressful basic training period than a lot of people have.
I think I've heard the word uses very squared away. Everybody was very squared away.
Yeah, exactly. Good term.
Yeah.
But everybody wanted to be there. Everybody joined of their own accord. Like I say, a lot of college kids, professional people that that took this reserve or guard route, and and so that was our common bond, and everybody got along. But usually if you have a unit of draftees, you've got some problems that inherently brings. You've got people that don't want to be there, so they go AWOL, or they don't do what they're asked to do, so they get in trouble, and it just kind of brings down the morale and well-being of everybody when that happens.
Yeah,
so we didn't have that problem.
Yeah, that's good. So from basic training, once you graduated basic training, can you tell us maybe about some of the specific specialized training that you got?
Well, when I completed my basic training, again at Fort Knox, I just moved a few blocks across post and I went to clerk school. I was, my initial job in the Army was a clerk typist. I was a clerk. And after my, I guess, 8 weeks of basic training, I moved, like I say, packed up my duffel bag, walked down the street a few blocks, moved into my new unit in clerk typist school. And I think, again, that was another 8 weeks training. At the end of that period, I was assigned back to my reserve unit, which was my initial unit was in Maysville, Kentucky. I was a student at the University of Kentucky. Some of my fraternity brothers lived in that area around Maysville. They knew of the unit and knew it had some vacancies. So there were 4 or 5 of us went together and joined this unit in Maysville, Kentucky. From there, they sent me to basic training, clerk school. I went back to that unit as a clerk. I did that for a couple of years. When I got out of school, I moved back to Litchfield, Kentucky, and Maysville was too long of a drive. So I transferred units to the 100th Division. The unit was in Hardinsburg, Kentucky. I went there as a clerk again. I did that for a couple of years, and I decided that I wanted to better my chances of advancement. At the time, I decided, yeah, I kind of like this Army. It's not a problem. I enjoyed the money, I enjoyed the camaraderie, and I enjoyed the purpose I was doing, you know, and the philosophy of national defense. So I went back to drill sergeant school. I volunteered to do that. So I went to drill sergeant school, and upon graduation, I became a drill instructor back in the same unit that I'd been a clerk in. In fact, I was the honor graduate in my drill sergeant school, again at Fort Knox. So then I was a drill sergeant in that unit for a few years, and reached the rank of a staff sergeant, E6 staff sergeant. And then again, I decided that I could be all I wanted to be if I did something else. So I volunteered to go to OCS. So I went to OCS Academy through the Kentucky National Guard and was commissioned second lieutenant. And basically to start a new career. I kind of got off the enlisted career and I went in the officer's career. I went through, you know, I advanced through second lieutenant, first captain, major, lieutenant colonel, and retired as a full bird 06 colonel. That's pretty much my career in a nutshell.
Do you, when you were at your basic training, or maybe after you graduated, do you remember maybe what you did on like recreation, or did you have any friends that you hang out with, or?
Well, again, once I finished, you know, you develop some friends in basic training. You kind of get to know some. But there were a couple of fellows from Salt Lake City, Utah. They were Mormons and just super nice guys. I don't know. I kind of buddied up with them in basic training. We became pretty good friends. Stayed in touch for a while, and then AIT the same way. You meet people. In AIT, my advanced clerk school, I kind of buddied up with a state trooper from Maryland.
Okay.
He was from Rockville, Maryland, and he was there doing the same thing I was doing. So, but then after that, I went back home to my unit. You know, people that I knew from back in Litchfield and Hardinsburg and around, you know, Brandenburg, around that part of Kentucky, that you know, that I know. I went to school with some of them. I know these guys. So we became, you know, and I went back to my just weekend drills. I went back to my civilian job, my civilian business that I had. So, you know, and then as I went along, then when I went on active duty, I developed friends, and I still have those friends that I visit today. You know, your military friends are pretty close bunch of guys.
Yeah. So where did you serve? You served in...
I joined the reserves, and like I said, Maysville. I went to Hardinsburg. I went from the 83rd ARCOM, Army Reserve Command, which was the head in Maysville. I went from there to the 100th Division in Kentucky, and I went to the 1st 2nd Brigade, 1st Battalion, 2nd Brigade, D Company in Hardinsburg. Served, I was in a unit for 14 years, stayed in one unit. I went from the company clerk to the company commander in that same unit. I went from a Spec 4 to a captain in that one unit.
You worked your way up pretty well, didn't
Yeah,
you?
well, like I said, I went to drill sergeant school, I came back, I went to OCS, and unusually they sent me back to the same unit. I was a training officer, a supply officer, and an executive officer, and eventually became the company commander. And from there I went to battalion headquarters in Owensboro, Kentucky, and was part of the training office. Then I went from there to brigade, which is also in Owensboro, shared the same building, stayed in training, and then in 1985-ish, I'll say, I went to 100th Division headquarters in Louisville as the public affairs officer. And I did that until, then I went from there to the Kentucky National Guard in 1989 to 1990 as the state adjutant general public affairs officer in Frankfurt. And then a year later, I went on active duty, back in the reserve. I went back to the 100th Division and went on active duty through the reserve program. Stayed there for another 17 years.
Okay.
And retired.
So, in talking to you, I've talked to maybe some people that know you, and it says you said you weren't in combat per se, but the thing that I want to talk about is you most. We'll fast forward to September 11th, 2001, and if you maybe tell some of the people where you were and some of your.
I was like I say, I had been when I went on AGR tour, an active Guard and Reserve tour. My first assignment was as a public affairs officer with the 83rd Army Reserve Command in Columbus, Ohio. Now that's ironic because the unit that I joined in Maysville, Kentucky was under the 83rd ARCOM, so I've come full circle all the way back to the same command that I started with. So I served there as the ARCOM Public Affairs Officer for 5 years under an reorganization of the Army Reserve structure. That unit was decommissioned, was deactivated. So I was, after that I went to St. Louis, Missouri as the Public Affairs Officer for the Army Reserve Personnel Command. And I was there for 2 years. And then I was called to the Pentagon as the Public Affairs Officer for the Chief Army Reserve, the OCAR office. And he wore 2 hats, Chief Army Reserve and Commander of the U.S. Army Reserve Command. So I was the Public Affairs Officer for that command. When I was promoted to Colonel, I had outrun the rank structure for the reserves. The highest rank they had was like a lieutenant colonel. So they assigned me to the U.S. Army Public Affairs Office in the Pentagon itself. I was in the Pentagon. I had satellite offices in office buildings around the Pentagon, but technically I was assigned to the Pentagon. But when I went to the regular Army, I was moved into the building. I was in the Pentagon, and I was served as the chief of the Strategic Planning Division and the chief of the Internal Communications Division. And that's what I was doing on 9/11. I was in the building on 9/11 when the plane hit. I had been, as part of my duties as the Strategic Planning Division, was I served as the direct public affairs support to the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army, the 2 biggest military Army people in the building.
Yeah.
I was their personal public affairs officer. I traveled with them. I was with them all the time, the 2 guys. So I was in the Secretary of the Army's office that morning when the first plane hit the World Trade Center on 9/11. And we were standing there talking about it and watching TV in his office when the second plane hit. At that time, that's when we realized that this was not an accident, that we've got a situation. But the Pentagon was not involved at the time. There was nothing going on. I was actually scheduled to chair a meeting back in my office with the Active Army, National Guard, and Army Reserve to consolidate public affairs functions, to eliminate redundancies, and to plug up any voids that there were in the public affairs arena among those three branches of Army. So that meeting, I started at 9:30. I left the Secretary's office. I said, I've got a meeting that I need to chair, and I left. And I had a sergeant with me as we were walking down the hall. I told him, I said, we would make a good target ourselves right here for this. That was like 20 minutes after 9. I go to my office, 9:30. I convene my meeting, 9:38. Bam, the plane hits our building. I'm around the corner from the Pentagon's a huge building. If you're not familiar with it, I mean it's a massive building, and stuff can happen on one side of the building and you never know about it on the other side.
Yeah.
So when the plane hit relatively close to where I was not injured. I was not damaged in any way, but I felt the concussion, could see the smoke, felt the heat. I was close enough to know what was going on. At that time, I got up. I was actually in a conference room across the hall from my office. I walked across the hall, checked my staff, everybody was okay. The Pentagon has an evacuation plan, much like a fire drill for a school.
Yeah.
So everybody was evacuating the building, and you had rendezvous points. So I told my staff, I said, if everybody's okay, go to the rendezvous point. I'll meet you in a minute. I went down the hall toward the blast site to try to help people get out of the building. A lot of panic, a lot of confusion. The building was dark, it was full of smoke, it was full of heat. The structure was damaged, and people were pretty upset to say the least. So I was trying to kind of help people get out of the building, direct them to exits, and try to get their attention, see if there was any injured at the time. So after a while, the authorities, the fire departments or whatever, came and asked us to leave. So I went outside, and they were asking for volunteers to go in the building and rescue people, and I volunteered to do that. We actually didn't do much of it because they decided they didn't want to put other lives in danger to just maybe do a recovery operation. So they finally pulled that off. So we're not going to do that. And after that, actually, as being part of public affairs, there was a lot of work to be done. The media was swarming the place, and that's what we do. Media relations, public relations. That's what public affairs is all about. So I basically went to work and doing my job at that point as a public affairs. I went to my rendezvous people and told them to go home, see them in the morning. And I went back to work, went back in our office area, which was kind of on the edge of the damaged area, and we were able to kind of function and begin to meet with the media and handle those kind of situations. And I'm not sure I even left the building that night. I stayed there all night.
Yeah.
And the next day, the most amazing thing about the whole 9/11 operation, the experience to me, was that the next day, I would say 95, 6, 7% of the people that worked in the Pentagon showed up for work that day. That was remarkable for me. People said, we're not gonna be intimidated. We work here. We came to work. Civilians, military, contractors, everybody showed up for work.
Yeah.
That's impressive to me.
It is. So by this time you knew that you pretty sure that this wasn't a mistake by crashing into the Pentagon?
No. It was. After the second plane hit the World Trade Centers in New York, everybody was aware of what was going on. There is a crisis management center in the Pentagon. I was sent there by my boss because I had the relationship with the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army. I was kind of the lead liaison for Public Affairs Office. So I went to the Crisis Management Center for the briefings and the plannings and what was going on and how we were going to deal with this and who was going to do what, and et cetera, et cetera. That was kind of my role at that
I mean,
point.
in a million years, you probably thought that never would happen when you went that day.
Not in a million. Of course, as a little country boy from Grayson County, I never thought I'd ever be in a Pentagon to begin with.
Yeah.
And now I'm dealing with this situation. It was an eye-opening experience,
So
to say the least.
could you hear did you like feel the concussion of the?
Oh yes, yeah.
Because
I
it was
was
a
close enough.
huge aircraft hitting
Yeah.
that.
I mean, it penetrated the building. The Pentagon is made up of 5 sides, obviously. It's got 5 floors above ground, and it's got 5 rings, the office rings. There's a ring, and then there's a row of offices, and then there's a hallway, a corridor around it, and there's another ring, and there's 5 rings, A, B, C, D, E ring. So the plane hit, E ring is the outside ring, A ring is the inside ring. The plane hit and penetrated through E, D, C, and stopped at B ring as it went through the building. Now, what people don't understand or don't realize, and thank God for this, was that the Pentagon was in the midst of a massive renovation program, and they were basically renovating it a side at a time, a slice of the pie, if you will, the 5 sides. So, and it was a 10-year plan. Each of the 5 sides was basically a 2-year project, a renovation, and it was mainly the Pentagon was built in 1945 during World War II, and it was the electricity. There was a lot of obsolete stuff, with all the computers and all. I mean, you plug in a coffee pot, you blow a fuse.
Yeah.
So it was mainly an infrastructure remodeling, but plus a reinforcement, along with some cosmetics and a typical reinforcement of paints and that type of stuff. But it took 2 years per side, and they had just finished. I'm talking a couple of weeks prior to 9/11. They had just finished the remodeling of, we'll call it pie slice A, and people were beginning to move back in. I had a real good friend that I actually helped carry boxes to his new office, and as it turned out, that was ground zero. But anyway, so we'll call that slice A. It was just, I'm talking a matter of 10 days. It had been completed, and people were starting to move in. Very few people had actually moved in. So the buildings, that section was still 95% empty.
Okay.
Slice B, adjacent to it, was under demolition. There was nobody in it. All the electricity had been off. They had the construction lights hanging from the ceiling, and they were doing demolition work. So there was nobody in that section other than a few workers. So here you've got 2 sections that as empty as they could possibly be, and the plane hit right in between the 2. So the loss of life was minimal. There was 125 people, I think, from within the building killed, plus the people on the plane that were killed. If the plane had hit anywhere else in the building, or if those 2 situations hadn't existed, there would have been thousands of people died that day.
Yeah.
So as it turned out, they couldn't have picked a better spot to hit. My reasoning is why they did that was because these weren't pilots; these were just pointers. They learned to point the plane at a target and crash.
Yeah.
So the Pentagon sits, outside of D.C. Actually, it's in Virginia, and around it, on some sides, there are skyscraper buildings, there are tall buildings, and there are obstacles. The side where they came from, where they hit the building, the only thing they had to negotiate was flying over the tombstones of Arlington Cemetery. So there was nothing in their way. That's why they chose that, in my opinion. That's why they chose that side of the building. I'm sure they would have loved to have hit anywhere else and caused a lot more death.
Yeah.
But that's their plan. That's where they had to hit. That's the best place the pilot could point the plane. So that's where they went. They came over Arlington Cemetery, scraped the ground, hit the building, and that was their only choice. Thank goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I've always heard, and it makes sense, that they picked the Pentagon because that represented the United States military might and
Yeah.
everything.
They would, they were trying, I think, to hit the financial centers. The World Trade Center represented industry, represented free enterprise, American way of life. They wanted to hit the military center. The Pentagon obviously is that.
And the White House too, also, right?
Yeah. And the third plane, everybody's pretty well convinced it was headed to the White House, to get the executive piece. So those are the three iconic pieces of our society, and that's what they were aiming at.
Do you remember talking to your family after that happened? I guess they were pretty concerned.
That's amazing. Of course, it was a busy day for me. I wasn't hurt. I was fine. I did what I could do, and I went about my job. My wife, on the other hand, didn't know a thing. The phones, I couldn't get to a phone. Of course, back then, cell phones weren't as they are today. So I think all the cell phone towers or whatever were maxed out or whatever it was, so you couldn't call. So it was probably middle afternoon before I ever was able to contact my wife to tell her I was alive or that I was at least okay. She had no idea. She was glued to the television. I have 3 sons, adult sons living around. They would call and say, "What about Dad? I don't know. Let's don't talk in case he tries to call." Yeah. So she had a miserable day. Finally, when I called her, she was relieved, and there was kind of a phone bank, kind of a tree set up. If you could ever get through on a phone, I gave her several names or phone numbers that people standing around me. I asked her, write these numbers down. And I gave her as many as I could. And I said, call these phone numbers and tell them that their person in the Pentagon is okay.
Okay, yeah.
So she was able to, but we tried to do that as much as we could.
Yeah. I know it's just personal. If you don't want to talk about it, you can let me know. But how was it when your wife heard your voice? Would you think that was pretty nice to hear, right?
Pardon?
When your wife heard your voice?
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Yeah, I understand. So there's a lot of stories. That's why I ask these people stuff like this, is because the people. It's one thing to read a book about 9/11, or it's one thing to listen to a pro. But if somebody's actually there, and you were actually there.
Yeah, like I say, I wasn't. At the ground zero, but I felt the shock. I was jarred in my chair. Tried to help get people out of the building.
Yeah.
It was a combat environment.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And everybody kind of went into combat mode. There are a lot of stories. I was telling you about a friend. General Maud was a 3-star general. Chief of he was the assistant chief of staff of personnel for the Army. He was the highest ranking fatality of 9/11 in the building.
3-star.
He had moved back into this A piece of pie I was telling you about.
Yeah.
His office was in E-ring. First place the plane hit was his office, and he was killed instantly. My friend was his assistant chief of staff. Outside the general's office, there are 2 desks. Chief of staff, assistant chief of staff, sat right outside his office. My friend that I'd served with, in past assignments, I met him when I went to Columbus, Ohio. I served with him in St. Louis. We served together in D.C. We were good friends. His desk was this other desk, and I helped him move his stuff into his new office, his new space, a week before that happened. 9/11, I couldn't find him. Everybody in that section that had moved in were killed. I couldn't find Paul. About a week later, he walks in my makeshift office, because my office was eventually heavily damaged by smoke and fire, heat and water from the firefighters and so on. So we had to relocate elsewhere in the building. He walks in my office. I jump up, hug the guy. Paul, where have you been? Story. His mother died the night before, and he went home on emergency leave. If he had been there, he wouldn't be with us today.
Yeah, that's
And that his
Yeah.
mother saved his life by
Yeah.
dying. She had been on her deathbed for weeks. He was from Youngstown, Ohio. He drove back and forth every weekend to see his mother. She died on September the 10th.
so he would have definitely
He
passed
would have
away.
been there. He
Yeah.
would have been there. I would have probably gone to his funeral.
Yeah.
And there's stories like that
Yeah.
everywhere in the Pentagon.
Yeah, the thing that I get the most from these interviews and being around the military my whole life is we talk about the veterans, but the families they have a lot of share
yeah.
a lot of the burden.
Yeah. If you don't have your family support, you don't have the soldier. You don't have his full attention. You don't have his dedication because he's got problems at home. You know, especially reserve. You know, being a company commander and the things I involved with public affairs. The Army used to say, kind of used to joke, say if they wanted you to have a wife, they would issue you one, you know. But they realized many years ago that if mom ain't happy, nobody's happy, you know. And or the spouse. There's plenty of women in the military too, and their husbands, and they, a lot of them were told it's either me or the Army. You got to make a choice. And the Army lost a lot of retention because the families just finally had enough. Said I don't want to live this kind of life.
Yeah.
And you either get out of the military or you get out of this marriage.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of times the people they leave their spouse while they're deployed or something.
Yeah, they're deployed. They're gone for a year,
Yeah.
and they leave their spouse at home with kids to manage the whole household. All the situations, pay the bills, get the money. And they're not used to doing that. Especially, it's not so much. It's much better now than it was even 10 years ago. But back during Desert Storm, when they started Desert Shield, Desert Storm, when they first started activating a lot of Guard and Reserves, it was really terrible. Obviously most of them were men that left the home, and they were the breadwinners in many cases. And but now, so here's a mother of small children that has no idea what her husband's doing, thousands of miles from home, worried about him, his safety, and trying to manage a house, pay the bills, feed the kids, get them dressed, get them off to school, and be both parents for them while their husband is off serving the country.
Yeah.
It is a stressful situation
It is.
on any of them.
So your experiences in the military, or maybe experiences that we've talked about, how do they affect your life now that you said you retired in 2005?
Right.
How does that affected your life, the way you look at things, or?
Well, I grew up my father was a great man. A lot of discipline. The biggest thing my parents taught me was a work ethic. I knew to go to work. I knew to get the job done, do it right the first time, and don't complain about it. So the military fit my style. I mean, that's the way the military is. Let's get it done. I love the military. Like I said, I spent 37 years, and I've got nothing but good stuff to say about it. And it helped shape my life to continue to be a disciplined, organized, matter of fact kind of guy. And I instilled that probably in my family as well. I'm as patriotic as the next guy, probably more so. I believe in the military. I believe in the national defense, our strength through the military. I'm all about what it stands for, and I use that in my civilian life. While I was a drilling reservist, I did that for 20 years, and then I was on this AGR tour I explained for 17 years. During that 20 years, I was in business. I was in the newspaper business. I owned, with a partner, a chain of weekly newspapers around this part of Kentucky, in Litchfield, Morgantown, Cadiz, Russellville, London, et cetera, et cetera. And that was my business. I ran that business except for 1 weekend a month when I was in uniform or when I was on active duty for my annual training, usually during the summer for a couple of weeks. So I had a civilian career as well. And they very well paralleled because I was a public affairs officer, which deals with media relations, I wrote press releases for these generals, for the Secretary of the Army.
Yeah.
I handled their press conferences. I wrote speeches for them. I did their day-to-day public relations, public affairs, and it meshed well with the skill sets that I had as a journalist in civilian life. That's how I got into public affairs to begin with. So the two careers were pretty well parallel, and I was able to use my military training and leadership and organizational skills in my business as an owner and manager, which helped tremendously, and I was able to use my journalism skills in my public affairs business in the Army.
Yeah.
So they're very complementary to each other.
I'll go out on the limb and say you probably weren't late and dragging in the last minute. You're probably early on time.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I'm always early.
And to the people that I'm telling the people now that everybody I've interviewed, everybody has been early.
Oh yeah, I got here at 1:30.
Yeah, yeah, and I've been around the military all my life, and I'm always 20 minutes early.
I'm always early. I used to say we would when I was in the Army Public Affairs at Army Public Affairs office, the general, 2-star general, would have his staff meeting every morning at like 6:30.
Yeah,
And I'd get there no later than 6. Be there. But sometimes the general would be a little bit late. But we used to say, no, he's not late. We're just early.
yeah, yeah.
But my grandkids today will laugh because if I'm supposed to meet them, pick them up from school at 2:45, I'm sitting there at 2 o'clock. And they always say, don't worry about it. Papa will be here.
Yeah, yeah. I've always noticed that everybody so far I've interviewed, everyone's early.
Yeah.
That's hard. If you do something for 20 or 30 or even like 3 or 4 or 5 years, it's
That's just the military. You're just organized. It comes with the territory. You're disciplined. You're organized. You're planned ahead. I mean, I know what I'm going to do. I've got a plan, whether it's a formal or a mental plan about everything I do.
yeah, yeah. I think that's really good.
It's just inherent with being a career soldier.
Maybe one of the closing questions that I ask you is, what do your feelings about the military in general or war in general? Now that you're retired and you've been in the military so long, how does it affect the way you look at the military or war now?
That's a good question. It's a deeper question than appears. I didn't go to war. It's absolutely amazing, and I'm pretty convinced that if I had, I wouldn't be sitting here today. I joined the Army during the Vietnam era. The war was going on, and then from there you had the Panama, you had Grenada, you had Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I was in still during Iraqi freedom and Kuwait, Afghanistan, excuse me. And I was never mobilized to go to war. So I have no right shoulder patches, as they say.
Yeah.
But I was around it. I have all the respect in the world for everybody that's served in all these different capacities of every military. Contrary to a lot of belief, I don't think there's a soldier in uniform ever that liked war or wanted to go to war or condoned war. It's a necessary evil that we do. And a person that puts on a uniform knows that that's his ultimate job, is to pick up a rifle and go to war and fight for his or her country. And it's a hard thing to grasp if you've never been in a uniform. But it's real.
Yeah. It affects. It's like I said. It's one thing to talk about things. It's another thing to experience them.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of friends go to Vietnam. Some of them didn't come home. I lost friends in the Pentagon that day. So not like a lot of the war veterans, but I know what being a soldier is all about.
Yeah. I guess you would agree that freedom isn't free, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. The last question that I'll ask, and I'm asking everybody so far, is if you can say anything to the people that's watching this, what would let them, what would the take home lesson be? What would you can say anything you want about?
I don't know what your future is going to be for the young people, but I would tell you to appreciate the military, what it stands for, what it represents, what it does for this country, and always respect those that have and will serve and do serve in the military. The military is a way of life that people choose to do, and thank God they do.
Yeah, and we were 100% volunteer army now. We don't draft anybody.
It's all volunteer. There's no draft. So the people that are in uniform chose to do that. They chose that as their career. You can be a doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, or wear the uniform, and it's just as important that we have them.
Yeah, I agree with you. I appreciate your time, and I thank you for your service.
Thank you for doing this. This
Yeah,
is a great service. We did some of this in my public affairs assignments, and it's great that we're doing it now, and to try to capture, especially the World War II veterans.
Yeah,
We're losing these great Americans every day. And the Korean War people are aging.
Yeah.
You know, and even Desert Storm, like I say, I mean, I'm 71 years old, and I'm way past that.
Yeah.
So you need to. It's great that the library is doing this,
Yeah,
and I'm proud of them for doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.